And today we are going to take that crafty blog site that we've been building the last couple streams and deploy it out to a server and look at how there's a couple of different steps, or I guess one thing that we're going to do a little bit differently than we might have done with a Craft 2 site or with any other CMS or software where you store the entire application code in your repository. Because in the case of Craft 3, which is what we're using here, of course you're not storing all of the vendor code, essentially the application code in your repository, because we are using Composer to manage all of that. So we are going to start with just checking the state of our project, since it's been a week since I've worked on this. I'm just going to open up the project in my code editor here. Give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Get rid of that. All right. So this is our project here. Let me bring that up on the screen as well. So it's craftyblog.dev. See if that loads. Does not. Let me restart Valet really quick. I've had that happen before. Can be a little finicky sometimes. I actually don't even know if it's Valet, if it's just Safari being a pain. Let's try now. There we go. All right, so this is the site that we built. And you remember last time we worked on this menu here, and we also worked on the categories. So when you were in a category or in an entry, you could click on a category and get a listing of entries in that category. So it's kind of what we've been working on. Really just all real fundamentals, basic site in Craft 3, but it's time now to go ahead and start to deploy this. So we're going to work on that today. So the first step is just to make sure I have all my changes checked in and make sure that my site is ready to deploy. So I'm just going to look at my status here. I'm using a tool called Get Savvy here in Sublime Text. You can see I'm on the develop branch, and we're going to, even though we're really deploying to kind of like a staging environment, I'm going to move to master just to kind of simulate if we were deploying to production. So I know we're on that, so I guess I want to look at my branches. So I've got develop and master. I'm going to check out master and then do a git merge. We want to merge develop into master. There we go. And so now we have all of the latest updates. You can see the head is pointed at this commit, which is the latest updates from Livestream 2, which is last week. So it's the last one I worked on. So now we know that that's ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and push it up. I just hit P on the keyboard and it actually pushes. So now that's up at origin. And the nice thing about Get Savvy is I can see what head is right here. You can see it matches. And then branch, and then it also tells me what the remote is that is associated with that branch. So I know that I'm pointed at the remote branch is, which is origin master. All right, so we have everything up there. Let me go back over here. If I reload this up on GitLab, we can see that we have all of our changes. All right, perfect. So I think we're ready to commit. Now the reason I want to make sure I do this is because the tool I'm going to use fetches right from the remote repository from origin, and so I need to make sure everything is up there before I deploy. All right, so what's the next step? Well, what are we going to use to deploy, and where are we going to deploy? So in my case, I'm going to deploy to a server, and it's at craftyblog.devhandle.com, and it's just a place where I can throw things up when I need to sort of as a temporary spot. I'm going to deploy it there to this server. This is a virtual host on a server. It's on AWS and managed by Forge. So really nothing fancy there. It doesn't matter where you're deploying. The main thing is that you know where you're deploying, you have the credentials, and that you have a tool to deploy. And of course that tool, I guess, could be, manually with something like, a file transfer program like Transmit or something like that. You could just manually sync those files back and forth, and then on the server you could run a Composer install or Composer update if you wanted to. So there's really all sorts of ways of doing it, but I can only do it one way in this live stream, so I picked the way that I'm going to do it, and that's going to be using a tool called DeployHQ. One of many tools. There's, I know Laravel has like Envoy, I think is what theirs is called. There's DeployHQ, there's DeployBot, I think it's DeployBot. I'm sure there's other tools as well. There's also, more command line oriented things like Capistrano, which if you've ever done anything in Rails, you might be familiar with. I'm sure other frameworks and languages have their own suite of deployment tools, but I'm going to use this one called DeployHQ. I think it's pretty approachable. It's all configured, or it all can be configured right from your web browser, so it makes it nice and handy. Now, what I've already done is I've already set up my server so that DeployHQ can connect to it over SSH. And now I need to, and I've tested that it works. So now I need to set up a couple of other things. One is going to be some config files that I want to deploy with each deployment, or optionally deploy with each deployment. And then also an SSH command that I want to run. In this case, we're going to run it after deployment and on the first deployment ever. And that's going to be one that then runs the Composer install, which then pulls down all of the Composer dependencies. So, or craft dependencies, I guess is the better way of putting it. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the config file. So what this does is, because we're using the .env files, is that we can't, we can store the .env file and just create it directly on the server. We can just, create the file, open it in Vim, and put in our stuff. We can transfer it there manually. But what I like to do is create the config file and have it be part of the deployment. And the reason I do this is that way a project is never deployed without a config file. And for some reason, it's never overwritten because every time you deploy, it'll be deployed along with it. And then I can also set up config files by environment, because like the .env file is going to be environment specific. So we want to create it by environment. So what do we need to do that? Well, first thing I need to do is figure out where I want it to live and then what its contents are going to be. So let's look back at our code. So the file lives in, the file actually lives in the root, which is .env. And this is what we're going to deploy out to the server, and we'll need to update it so it's relevant or proper for our actual server environment. So I'm going to grab this and then paste it in here, and then we're going to, let's see, we'll go ahead and put in .env, and then we'll put in what the connection information is. So in this case, we're going to call it production for now. MySQL, localhost. The user is craftyblog. And the password is, which don't worry, I'll be removing this, is that right there. And the database is called craftyblog. We don't want any prefix, and the port is that. So here for servers, I don't want to upload this to all future servers. I just want to choose only crafty staging. So we're tying this config file only to this environment. So let's go ahead and create that. All right. So the next thing I need to do is go into my, let's see, my settings, I think. Actually, let me go back to config. All right, that looks right. Servers and groups. Actually realize I need to edit this because I need to edit to where we're going to deploy from. And that's because if we look back over, let's see. Oh, that's actually right. So we're going to deploy from the root. Just want to make sure. Sometimes I check these projects in with another level of directories. All right, so we're going to deploy from the root. And that means we just leave that blank. So that's good. All right, so back at the config files, we got our .env file. We're going to include that, and it'll be deployed and added to the server in the project root. And the next thing we need is an SSH command. And we have two options in DeployHQ, and this will really depend on whatever tool you're using. I'm not specifically promoting DeployHQ here, it's just the one that I have chosen to use. And we want to run a command after the deployment is done. And we want to run composer install, but we only want to run that the first time that the project is deployed. Now, down the road, with each subsequent deployment, we could then go ahead and run composer update or something like that if we wanted to. But let's just go ahead and create a new SSH command. We'll just call it composer install. And we'll just run composer install, and that'll run from the site root. How long should this be run for? Let's just say 10 minutes. Stop the deployment if the command fails. Yeah, we'll stop it. When should the command be executed? So after changes are pushed. Every deployment, first deployment to the server after the first deployment. So first deployment to the server after the changes are pushed. Run this command on all current and future servers. No, we're going to run it on crafty staging. We're going to create it. All right. So now we have our site created on the server, a place for the site to live. I have the domain pointed already, and I have now set up my deployment tool to deploy. So just make sure we're not missing anything, since this is the first time I've done this on a live stream. So let's deploy the project. Now I can choose the servers. We just have one. I can choose the branch. We're going to use master. It's going to show me, we're going to start at the very first commit, and we're going to go to the last one, which was this latest updates. And we can schedule this too. We could run it, at certain times, but we're going to do it immediately. And under advanced options, I can also choose to copy config servers, copy config files to the server and run build commands. Now you may think run build commands is what we need to do, but that's actually a whole nother thing. We don't want to do that. We do want to copy config files to the server though. And you can also do preview, which if I was deploying something like a fix or an update to production, I would preview it first. It just gives you, it's kind of like a dry run. It just gives you a list of the files that have changed or been deleted or been added. And it's, for me, a nice sanity check. And then otherwise you just hit deploy, and the deployment starts. So once there's a slot open for deploying, everything will be uploaded, and you can see that it's being transferred right now. And you see their next steps after transferring files are uploading the config files, or the config file, and then running the SSH command. Now the one config file I just realized, well no, we did put the database connection information in there, so we should be good there. Trying to think if there was anything else that I needed to put in. But let's just see how it goes here with our first shot at it. All right, there we go. Just check on the stream really quick here. Looking good. Going to, good, that's paused, all right. So, all right, so it looks like we have, so it halted the deployment. Could not find, yes, look, so it's trying to run it from home/forward, which is the home directory when you, for the user. And I actually need to get into the project. So let me go ahead and try this again. So I'm going to go into my SSH commands and edit this. So I'm going to do cd craftyblog.devhandle.com and then run composer install. Let's see. First deployment to the server. I think I might have lost my ability to do that here since I messed up the command, but let's see what I can do. So I'm going to go to deploy project. All right, so yeah, so it's still my first deployment. Go show advanced options, copy config, we're good. So let's do a deploy. All right, so now it's back to deploying. And once the deployment's done, we'll upload the config file, and then we'll test that command again. And that's a good reason that I had it fail, the deployment fail, if that command failed, because the site isn't going to be working if the application code isn't there. So definitely smart to make that fail. All right, let's see. Still going. All right, so looks like that's working. There we go, our deployment has successfully completed. I did notice one thing, that I have my web server config pointed at public, but it actually should be web. So I went ahead and fixed that. So let's look at our deployment report. And it shows us everything that happened here. Looks like that's all good. So now we can try to check our site or our server. We're going to reload it, see what we get. All right, it says unavailable. Let's see what happens when we go to /admin. I think I left this as admin. Did I change the CP trigger? All right, so it's telling me to install Craft. So what does that tell me? I think that tells me that maybe, oh, of course, there's one big step I missed. We need to load our database up, right? That's why. It's the database, it's connecting to it, otherwise we would have gotten a different error. But I did not actually load the database. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me just move that out of the way. I'll bring this over. This is just an app that I like. It's really handy called SQL Pro. Here's the local host right here. Oops. Oh, that's the actual server. Here's the local version on Valet. And I'm just going to export this out to a SQL file. And then go over here, and since it's our first deployment, I can just do this really basically like this. Since it's our first deployment, I can do it that way. And we'll import it into the database on the server. And then Craft won't see an empty database. It will see a database populated with tables and data. Then hopefully we should be able to have our site up and running. Let's take a look. All right, there we go. Now, back to our site, reload. There we go. So now if I go here and just look at Crafty Blog, perfect, we got it. Sees everything's working? Yep. And we got it all working. Our domain is right. Sometimes I like to look at the developer tools, and then at resources. Let's go to like style sheets here. So and reload. Make sure it's not. I see it is flipping me back over to craftyblog.dev, and that is. Let's go back. There we are. And that is because I did not set up the site URL. So if I go into sites, so remember in Craft 3 we have this, concept of sites. You used to be able to set your URL under settings and general is where it used to be. But now because we have the concept of sites, even if you have one site, it's still the default site. So I can update it here. I'll just update it here in the database. And we just make this devhandle.com. That way all my URLs are generated properly. It should be the same for my images. I need to update this as well. And then update my path, which is going to be homeforge craftyblog.devhandle.com/web/uploads. All right, we'll save that. Perfect. So now if I go to my site, craftyblog.devhandle.com, we get the site. And the links are all generated properly now because we have the proper site URL. And there we go. Let's take a look. Perfect. All right, so just like that, I was able to deploy this simple site. So this is, no doubt a really simple deployment for a really simple site, but I was able to do that. And if I wanted to set up another environment, let's say, this is staging and I want to deploy to production, then in my DeployHQ, let's go back, I would obviously create another server, and I would create a new server, and then I would also go into my config file and I would create a new config file for that new server, that new environment, and then choose it from here. And that way I would have a different, and I keep saying config, but I actually mean the .env file. and I would have a different .env file for each of those environments, because that's how they're supposed to be done, and they'll be deployed every time. And so every time it'll just deploy it. Now, the key here is not to make changes to your .env file right on the server, or if you do, you need to make sure you make them in your your project for the deploy tool. You also have the option when you deploy is to not copy the config files to the server, and sometimes I'll do that. It's just not necessary to deploy it if there's not any changes, so I'll uncheck that. So yeah, so here's like the preview. Probably won't show anything because we're on the latest thing here. You can see there's no files to be added or removed, but it lets us preview what's going to happen, and then we can run our deployment. All right, so we have our site done. So let's just kind of go through the process of making a change and then deploying that out. One of the things we could do is set up automated deployments, and when you create a server, all the way at the bottom of that, you have the option here for enable auto deployments, and you can grab this hook and then add it to like your repository for post, like a post, was it a post push receive, I believe is the hook that would be used, and you can then have it, then it'll trigger this deployment tool, and then it'll make the deployment. We'll just turn that off, but I do want to go through and make a change and then see how we can deploy that out manually. So let's go into our templates here, and let's see, let's try something here. What can we change? Go into our index. There we go. I'm just going to make that, add a leading slash to that, and we'll just change that. So like just real simple stuff, but the point is to illustrate the change. Now one thing here is I'm on master, which I shouldn't be working in, so I'm going to check out develop and look at my status, and then stage this, commit it, made a simple change to demo deployment, and create the commit, and then push it. Now a lot of times, like with workflows, there'd be like a pull request for review, so we can merge into master and all of that, very official. We're not going to do that here, but again, that's how I would typically do it. But here I'm going to just check out master and then merge develop into master and then push it. And then we have it pushed. And if I go back to my deployment tool and I say deploy project, looks like it hasn't captured it yet. Try again. Let's see. See if we can get it to update. Make sure that's actually up in our origin. It is not. Maybe the push didn't go through. Let's see. There we go. Looks like it went through that time. So now, if I go back and try that again. There we go. Now we got it. So our start revision is where we last deployed at, and then this is our end revision. Start immediately. I'll leave copy config server config file off, but I do want to preview it just to confirm. And you see it's templates is what's going to be, this template index.twig is going to be deployed, one file added. And I can say run deployment. So it should happen pretty quick. There we go. One deployed. Go back to our site here. Reload, and you can see that this changed to 3, so I know that it's been updated. So we are all good there. All right, so that's the basics of deploying a Craft 3 site with Composer. And really the biggest change from others is that you're not storing the code in your repository, like the Craft application code or any of its dependencies. You can see in my repository here, there is, there's a web directory and my templates and, config and a few other things, but there's no like Craft directory or Craft app directory. We just don't store it. So the repository is like nice and lightweight. It's really only my stuff, the stuff that I'm going to configure. So it makes it really nice and simple in that way. And then we're using Composer. Pull up this via an SSH command in my deployment tool. Lots of deployment tools will let you run commands on the server before, sometimes you have like a pre-flight command you have to run before or after a deployment. And in our case, we're running Composer install on the first deployment to the server. So it didn't just run this last time, and I'm cding into the directory of the project and then running Composer install. And on that first deployment, it pulled down all of the vendor code, basically all the dependencies for this Craft project. I have it set to run for 10 minutes, and I have it to actually fail the entire deployment if the command fails for some reason, since it's required for the site to work, that works. Now, I could do something like Composer update like this. I could say cd craftyblog.devhandle.com and Composer update. If I wanted it to run at every deployment after changes are pushed, I could do that. And we can say 10, stop it if it fails. Let's see, first deployment to the server after the first deployment, and we'll say every deployment in this case because we've already done our first deployment. And I'm going to only run this on the one server that I've created. So now if I do another deployment, it's going to run Composer update. So if I go back to my code and let's see, just make another change here. Let's just say written by, just real simple changes just to make it nice and quick. Make that. Push up that change from develop. And then we'll check out master and merge, develop into it, and then push master up. All right, so now we should have that change up on the server. So if I do deploy project, there we go. We have another deployment. My advanced options, I can uncheck that or check it. Doesn't matter. It's not going to change. And I can have that start immediately. I can preview it again like I've done before. And you can see now it's going to update this file, which has changed, but it's also going to add this .env file, which is part of the config file deployment. So it's gonna note that it's gonna do that. All right, so we'll run the deployment. All right, see, we're gonna transfer files, uploading, and now it's gonna run our composer update command. You can see it tells me the command right here that it's running. There we go. So now our deployment is successful. Back to our site, make sure I got the right one. Yep, reload. And everything's working just as it should. So that's how you can add the composer update after the fact. I haven't really tested sort of like whether that will break things, because if you're running it composer update with every deploy, then you're basically just assuming that you're just going to want to update all the time. So, and it'll be based on your composer.lock file. So whatever was in there, that's what it's going to use as what it needs to get. And there's actually a good, if you go to nystudio107.com by Andrew Welch, he has a nice Craft 3 deploy. Let's see what he has here. He has, I believe it's this one. Yeah. So he's got a whole big overview of about Craft 3, but the one thing that you might want to look at is his approach. Let me just find it. Here we go. Deploying Craft CMS. We're kind of doing some similar things. He kind of goes over the different files and talks about embracing Composer. So we're going to make it easy for ourselves. He has another command here, no interaction, preferred dist, and then optimize autoloader. And those are the settings that he uses. And he also talks about how you can use Composer Update and specify a specific plugin that you want to update as well. So that's, read through this as well. I think it's some good extra information, a little bit more detail than I covered just in this quick overview of deploying a Craft 3 project. All right, give it a little time check here. I think that is about it for this one. And I think for now, that's like the last in our series on Crafty Blog. I have a couple ideas for what I want to stream next for what we're going to do. Let me actually go find some of those really quick. So handy index cards. It's always good. Looks like I actually only have one in here. Yeah, I wanted to cover, I know what it was. If any of you have used GraphQL, there's a CraftQL implementation of it by Mark Hewitt, who I'm honored to have worked with for several years. But I wanted to look at that as well. I think that would be fun to kind of explore GraphQL. I don't have a ton of experience with it, so it'd be a nice learning experience with that. So that's probably one of the upcoming topics. If you have any, you can shoot me an email, support@majingo.com. Let me know what you want to see, or drop a note in the chat along with the video, even if it's after the fact. And I'll do something for that as well. So that is it for this one. Thanks for following along and for watching this little short series on building a simple site with Craft 3. And I will see you guys on the next stream. Check the schedule here on Twitch. I put in when I typically will stream. I'm trying to stream on Fridays as well on something that's not like CMS related. The last 2 streams, I think, I did Git version control. I didn't do one this last Friday. I'm going to try to do one this Friday if I can. It's typically towards the end of the day. Kind of as I'm wrapping up my week, I'll hop on and do another one. But let me know how you like it. Otherwise, I will see you guys on the next stream.